when one man delayed an entire battalion for 72 hours until reinforcements arrived. This is not a legend, it is not a myth, it is a documented reality from the frozen forests of Europe in December 1944. The place was the Ardennes forest, straddling eastern Belgium and western Germany. The time was December 17, just one day after Adolf Hitler launched his last great gamble of the war, Operation Wacht am Rhein.
Snow lay thick beneath towering pine trees. Ice coated rifles, boots, and fingers alike. Visibility was reduced to mere yards by fog and drifting snow. The temperature hovered below -10 degrees Celsius, turning every breath into pain. Here, on the northern shoulder of what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge, German forces surged westward with overwhelming strength. Entire American units were being pushed back, isolated, or swallowed whole. And somewhere deep inside that chaos, cut off behind enemy lines, was one American infantryman. For 3 days, for 3 nights, he would fight alone. Little did he know, what happened next would become legendary.
The responsibility for holding this sector of the front fell to the U.S. 99th Infantry Division, the Checkerboard Division. Positioned east of Elsenborn Ridge, the division occupied one of the most critical defensive positions in the entire Ardennes campaign. Elsenborn Ridge was not impressive to the eye, just a series of forested rises and frozen clearings, but strategically it was priceless. Whoever controlled it controlled the roads leading west toward Liège and the Meuse River. If the Germans broke through here, Allied logistics would collapse. If they failed, the German offensive would bleed out.
Facing the 99th Infantry Division was the 277th Volksgrenadier Division, reinforced by veteran units and supported on its flanks by elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. These German formations were well-equipped, well-led, and desperate. Their battalions advanced with MG-42 machine guns, 81mm mortars, Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons, assault troops armed with STG-44 assault rifles. They moved fast, they moved aggressively, and they exploited every gap. One such gap opened during the chaotic fighting on the morning of December 17th.
The man. His name was Private First Class William Bill Harrington, age 24, rifleman and scout with Company F, 394th Infantry Regiment, 99th Infantry Division. Harrington was not an officer. He was not a decorated hero. He was an ordinary GI, quiet, disciplined, and reliable. On the morning of December 17th, Harrington was assigned to act as a forward screening scout, positioned ahead of his company's fallback line to warn of German movement. Heavy fog and snow limited visibility. Artillery thundered across the forest. Then the German infantry came, far earlier and in far greater numbers than expected. Company F was forced into a fighting withdrawal. Communications collapsed. Platoons broke apart under pressure from flanking German units.
During one brutal engagement near a frozen logging road, Harrington's squad was caught by enfilading MG-42 fire. 2 men went down instantly. Mortar rounds followed, exploding among the trees. Harrington helped drag one wounded soldier toward cover, but another burst of machine gun fire forced him to retreat or be killed. By the time the smoke cleared, Harrington was alone. No squad, no platoon, no clear route back. Behind him lay advancing German forces. Ahead of him lay American lines, nearly 2 miles away, across enemy-controlled forest. And moving directly through that forest was an entire German battalion.
The realization. Harrington crawled into a shallow depression beneath snow-laden branches and waited. From his position, he could see movement, long columns of German infantry pushing west. He counted them carefully, platoon after platoon, company after company. This was no patrol. This was a full battalion advance, roughly 600 to 700 men, moving to exploit the collapsing American line. If they reached Elsenborn Ridge before U.S. reinforcements arrived, the ridge would fall. Harrington understood the truth instantly. He could try to escape, or he could stay.
And if he stayed, he might delay them. Against impossible odds, with limited ammunition, and completely alone. He checked his gear.
M1 Garand with 6 clips, 3 fragmentation grenades, trench knife, canteen already starting to freeze. Then he made his decision. He would fight.
By 1500 hours, the snowstorm thickened, reducing visibility to less than 60 yards. The Ardennes forest absorbed sound, turning the battlefield into a muffled, claustrophobic maze. From his concealed position beneath fallen branches, PFC William Harrington watched German infantry advance along the frozen logging road below. They moved cautiously at first. The lead elements, scouts from the 277th Volksgrenadier Division, spread out in pairs, rifles at the ready. Behind them came heavier formations, squads with MG-42 machine guns mounted on sleds, mortar teams dragging ammunition crates, officers hunched over maps. Harrington waited.
At 180 yards, he selected his first target, an officer carrying binoculars. Harrington exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. Crack! The German fell backward into the snow. Instant chaos. Shouts echoed through the trees. Soldiers dove for cover. MG-42 swung upward, firing blindly into the forest. Snow and bark exploded around Harrington's position.
He didn't stay. Harrington slid down the ridgeline, crawling on his stomach, until he reached a secondary firing position he had prepared minutes earlier. From there, he fired again, dropping a machine gun assistant struggling to bring his weapon into action. 2 shots, 2 bodies, then silence. German officers halted the column. Orders were shouted. The battalion stopped moving. For the first time that day, the German advance hesitated. Harrington checked his watch. 4 minutes. That was all it took.
By 1600 hours, the Germans began probing the forest more aggressively. Small squads fanned out, searching for what they believed to be a concealed American outpost. Harrington exploited their assumption. He fired sporadically from multiple directions, spacing his shots carefully. 1 round from the north, another from the east, then silence. Then a grenade tossed into the snow 50 yards away. Each explosion echoed louder than it should have in the frozen air. German commanders concluded they were facing at least a reinforced platoon, possibly more. They deployed their battalion cautiously, spreading out rather than advancing in force. This slowed them dramatically. By 1700 hours, Harrington had delayed the German timetable by nearly an hour.
But the Germans were adapting. Mortar rounds began falling in a deliberate pattern, walking toward Harrington's earlier firing positions. Snow geysers erupted in timed intervals. One blast knocked him flat, filling his mouth with ice and dirt. His ears rang. His left shoulder throbbed where shrapnel sliced through his sleeve. Still, he moved. He relocated again, this time crawling into a narrow ravine, partially hidden by fallen trees. From there, he could observe the German battalion reorganizing. It was massive. Rows of infantry crouched among the trees. Officers pointed west. Runners carried messages. A command group gathered around a radio operator. Harrington realized the terrifying truth. This was no longer a delay. This was a direct engagement with an entire battalion, and it was only the first day.
Darkness fell early in the Ardennes. By 1730 hours, night swallowed the forest completely. Temperatures plunged. Harrington's gloves stiffened with ice. He flexed his fingers constantly to keep them from freezing solid. German flares suddenly burst overhead. White light cascaded through the trees, casting long, distorted shadows. The forest became a frozen nightmare of movement and stillness. German search parties advanced methodically. Harrington heard them before he saw them. Boots crunching through snow, whispered orders, the clatter of equipment. At least 3 platoons were now engaged in hunting him down. He pressed himself against a fallen log. Snow caked over his helmet and shoulders.
A German patrol passed within 20 yards. One soldier stopped. Harrington's heart hammered. The soldier raised his rifle, scanning the darkness. Another whispered something in German. The patrol lingered. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then they moved on. Harrington exhaled silently, but the hunt intensified.
By 2000 hours, dogs were brought forward. Their barking echoed unnervingly through the trees. Harrington smeared snow and mud across his uniform, masking his scent as best he could. He crawled downhill, slipped across a frozen stream bed, and doubled back uphill, confusing the trail. Once, a dog passed within 10 yards. Harrington gripped his knife. ready to fight hand-to-hand if discovered, but the animal veered away. He survived the night in 10-minute intervals of restless, frozen sleep. His canteen was solid ice. Hunger gnawed at his stomach. By midnight, German activity slowed, but Harrington knew the truth. The Germans would not stop. They had a battalion to move, a ridge to seize, and one stubborn American blocking their path. As the first day ended, Harrington had achieved the impossible. He had delayed a German battalion for nearly 8 hours, and the worst was yet to come.
Dawn came slowly on December 18, 1944. A pale gray light seeped through the Ardennes forest, revealing a landscape torn apart by shell fire and trampled snow. Smoke drifted between the trees. The temperature dropped further overnight, sinking to nearly 15 degrees Celsius. Frost clung to every branch, every rifle barrel, every breath. POC William Harrington forced his eyes open. His body screamed in protest. His fingers were numb. His boots were frozen stiff. His left shoulder burned where shrapnel had torn through flesh the night before. Yet the sounds told him everything he needed to know. The Germans were still there. Voices carried through the trees, calm, organized, confident. Officers barked orders. Men formed up. Harrington carefully lifted his head just enough to peer through the branches. What he saw made his stomach drop. The German battalion had not withdrawn. They had dug in. Mortar pits were being prepared. Machine gun nests were in place, covering key approaches. Rifle companies were spreading out in disciplined lines, tightening a noose around the forest sector Harrington occupied. They were done probing. Now they were advancing deliberately.
By 8 o'clock hours, German infantry began moving west again, but slowly, methodically, covering every meter. The battalion advanced in bounding overwatch. MG-42 set up every 100 yards, mortars positioned to suppress any resistance. Harrington knew he could not stop them outright, but he could still delay them. He shifted position and waited for the lead elements to close to 150 yards. His hands shook as he raised the Garand. He steadied his breathing. Crack! A German pointman collapsed. Another shot followed, then another. Harrington moved immediately, sliding downhill through snow, reappearing 50 yards away. He fired again, dropping a machine gun assistant. German fire erupted instantly. Mortar rounds crashed into the tree line, bark shredded into the air. Snow exploded around Harrington as he dove into a shallow crater. A concussion slammed through his chest. His ears rang violently. For a moment, he thought he was deaf. Then the pain came. Shrapnel had torn into his leg. Blood soaked into the snow beneath him. Harrington gritted his teeth, wrapped his scarf tightly around the wound, and forced himself to crawl. He refused to stop.
By 1,000 hours, the Germans realized something was wrong. They were being delayed far longer than expected. Radio trackled. Runners sprinted between companies. Orders were changed. Instead of pushing forward, the battalion commander ordered a sweep and encirclement. 2 companies began advancing from the north. Another swung south. Mortars pounded suspected American positions. Harrington watched it unfold from a snow-covered ravine. They were trying to trap him. For the first time since this ordeal began, fear truly gripped him. He had lost track of time, he had lost blood, and his ammunition was running low. He counted his remaining clips. 3. That was all. German patrols closed in from multiple directions. At one point, a squad passed less than 15 yards away. Harrington lay motionless, snow covering his uniform, breath barely escaping his lips. Another squad followed, then another. The forest felt alive with enemy movement. This was the moment everything seemed lost.
Darkness fell again, colder than before. Harrington crawled deeper into the ravine, pressing his back against frozen earth. His leg throbbed with pain. His teeth chattered uncontrollably. He knew the signs. Hypothermia. He forced himself to move, slowly flexing his fingers, rubbing his arms, whispering to himself to stay awake. German flares burst overhead,
bathing the forest in harsh white light. Shadows jumped across the snow. Search parties advanced, bayonets fixed. Dogs barked again, closer this time. Harrington tightened his grip on his knife. If they found him, he would not surrender. A patrol approached. 10 yards, 8, 6. One German soldier slipped on ice and cursed softly. Another laughed. They paused, scanning the ravine. Harrington pressed his face into the snow, eyes burning, heart pounding so hard he was certain they could hear it. Seconds passed, then the patrol moved on. Harrington sagged with relief, but he knew the truth. The Germans would attack in force at dawn. He would not survive a third day like this. Something had to change.
Sometime after midnight, Harrington made a decision. He would no longer simply delay. He would deceive. Using his last grenades, Harrington began creating false positions, rolling grenades down distant slopes, firing single shots from widely separated points, shouting commands in the darkness. The Germans interpreted this as a reinforced American platoon conducting fighting withdrawals. The battalion halted again. Hours passed. By dawn, the Germans were behind schedule, badly behind. And unknown to them, American reinforcements were moving toward Elsenborn Ridge. Harrington had bought another night. The third dawn rose reluctantly over the Ardennes. Snow still fell in slow, heavy flakes, muffling the forest and cloaking the battlefield in an eerie calm. The temperature remained brutal, well below freezing, and a biting wind cut through the trees, carrying with it the distant rumble of artillery. PFC William Harrington did not sleep. He could not. His body shook uncontrollably. His wounded leg had stiffened, the bandage frozen solid with blood and ice. Every movement sent waves of pain through him, yet he forced himself to remain alert, because the Germans were coming. Again. At 0700 hours, German artillery opened fire with renewed intensity. Mortar rounds crashed along the ridgeline, detonating among the trees with concussive force. Snow and earth erupted into the air. Branches snapped and fell like spears. The battalion commander had had enough. After 2 days of delay, German patience was gone. This time, the battalion advanced in full strength. Harrington watched through pain-clouded eyes as wave after wave of infantry moved forward. Companies advanced shoulder to shoulder, supported by MG-42 machine guns firing long, sweeping bursts. Mortar teams worked relentlessly, blanketing suspected American positions. Harrington knew this assault was different. This was not probing. This was annihilation. He crawled to a firing position overlooking a narrow approach, a natural choke point between two snow-covered ridges. If the Germans passed here, they would break through to the ridge road beyond. He waited until the lead elements closed to 120 yards. Then he fired. One German fell. Then another. The Germans responded instantly. MG-42 fire raked the ridgeline. Bullets snapped inches above Harrington's head. He rolled downhill, disappearing into a thicket. He reappeared moments later from another angle, firing again. The illusion continued. To the Germans, it seemed as though multiple American positions were firing in coordination. They slowed. Once again.
By 1,000 hours, Harrington was near collapse. His hands were swollen and numb, his vision blurred. Each reload took precious seconds as his fingers struggled to function. He had one clip left. German infantry pressed closer. At one point, a squad advanced within 30 yards, grenades clutched in gloved hands. Harrington threw himself behind a tree as an explosion rocked the ground. Shrapnel tore through the branches. He screamed, not in fear, but in pain, as another fragment tore into his side. Blood soaked into the snow. For a moment, he lay there, gasping. This was it. This was where it ended. Fear gripped him, not fear of death, but fear that everything he had endured would be for nothing. Then, faintly, through the chaos, he heard something else, a distant sound, American artillery, not behind him, ahead of him. Harrington forced himself upright. The Germans had halted again, confused, cautious. They did not know it yet, but American units were closing in. By 1400 hours, the German battalion was badly disorganized. Officers argued, runners sprinted between companies, casualties were being dragged to the rear. Harrington exploited every second. He fired his final clip sparingly, one shot, then silence.
Another shot from a different position. He shouted false commands in the wind. "Second squad, fall back." The Germans hesitated. Once more. It was unbelievable. One man, barely standing, still delaying an entire battalion. As darkness began to fall, Harrington dragged himself into a shallow foxhole, abandoned earlier in the fighting. He curled into himself, teeth chattering violently. He no longer felt his feet. He no longer felt his hands. But he was still alive. The third night was endless. German patrols continued to probe, but without the confidence of earlier days. They moved cautiously, wary of ambush. Harrington lay motionless, conserving what little strength he had left. He drifted in and out of consciousness. Faces flickered through his mind. His squad, his family, men already lost to the snow and fire. He whispered to himself, "Just hold, just hold." Sometime after midnight, he heard engines, not German, American. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. Reinforcements were close. Harrington allowed himself a single thought of hope. The forest was unnaturally quiet. Snow continued to fall, soft and relentless, covering bloodstains, shell craters, and frozen bodies alike. The wind died down, leaving behind a heavy silence, broken only by the distant crackle of gunfire far to the west. PFC William Harrington lay half-conscious in the shallow foxhole, his breath shallow and ragged. His uniform was stiff with ice. His wounded leg was numb. He could no longer feel it at all. Then he heard it, a sound that did not belong to the forest. Engines, low at first, then louder. Not the sharp clatter of German half-tracks. This was deeper, heavier, American armor. Harrington forced his eyes open, every muscle screaming in protest. He pressed his ear against the frozen ground, listening carefully. Yes, tracked vehicles, multiple engines, moving steadily east. The reinforcements had arrived. German sentries along the forward edge of the battalion stiffened as they too heard the engines. Officers rushed forward. Field phones were grabbed. Orders were shouted in sharp, urgent tones. The German battalion commander faced a brutal realization. The American line had not collapsed. Instead, it had solidified. What had been assumed to be a stubborn delaying action by a reinforced U.S. platoon was now revealed as something worse. The Americans had used the delay to bring in fresh forces. The battalion had been held in place for 3 full days, 72 hours, an eternity in a fast-moving offensive. Without warning, the morning silence shattered. American artillery opened fire in full force. 105mm and 155mm shells screamed overhead, slamming into German assembly areas behind the forest line. Trees were shredded, snow erupted in towering columns. Shockwaves rolled across the frozen ground. German casualties mounted rapidly. Machine gun positions were obliterated. Mortar teams were buried alive. Communications collapsed as shells severed lines and destroyed command posts. Harrington felt the concussions roll through his body. He pressed his face into the snow as debris rained down. For the first time since December 17, the Germans were no longer advancing. They were retreating.
American infantry followed close behind the barrage. Elements of the 2nd Infantry Division advanced cautiously through the trees, rifles raised, bayonets fixed. Behind them moved fresh units from the 99th Infantry Division, re-establishing a solid defensive line along the approaches to Elsenborn Ridge. German resistance collapsed quickly. Exhausted, disorganized, and shaken by days of delay, the Volksgrenadiers fell back in scattered groups. Some surrendered, others fled east, abandoning equipment and wounded comrades in the snow. The German battalion that had been delayed for 3 days was effectively neutralized as a fighting force. A squad from Company G, 2nd Infantry Division, moved carefully along a ravine, scanning for remaining German stragglers. One soldier froze. There, by the foxhole. They approached cautiously, rifles trained on the motionless figure half buried in snow. It was Harrington. His face was pale, his lips blue, his eyes barely open. "Jesus Christ," one soldier whispered. "He's alive." They knelt beside him. One shook his shoulder gently. Hey, buddy, you're safe. We got you." Harrington tried to speak. Only one word escaped his lips. "Held." Then he slipped into unconsciousness.
As officers pieced together reports over the next several hours, the truth slowly emerged.
German documents recovered from abandoned positions confirmed. The battalion had halted repeatedly due to what was believed to be strong American resistance. Multiple companies had been diverted to hunt a well-coordinated enemy force. Mortar and artillery support had been delayed due to uncertainty and confusion. The battalion failed to reach its objective on schedule, and at the center of it all, one American infantryman. Harrington was evacuated to a field aid station near Malmedy. Doctors recorded severe hypothermia, frostbite in both feet and fingers, shrapnel wounds to shoulder and leg, extreme exhaustion and dehydration. One medic later remarked, "I've never seen a man so close to death who refused to die. The moment that changed everything." The delay Harrington created allowed reinforcements to secure Elsenborn Ridge, American artillery to establish dominant firing positions, the northern shoulder of the bulge to hold completely. German armor never broke through here. Historians would later identify this sector as the only major portion of the Ardennes front that never collapsed, and it held because one man refused to give ground. Late morning, as the smoke cleared over the Ardennes, the scale of what had just occurred became unmistakable. The German battalion from the 277th Volksgrenadier Division, tasked with breaking through the northern shoulder of the American line, had failed completely. Its advance timetable had collapsed. Companies were scattered. Command cohesion was shattered. Ammunition dumps lay smoldering in the snow. Dozens of bodies lay frozen where they had fallen. German casualty reports recovered later indicated over 100 killed or wounded, multiple MG-42 positions destroyed, mortar sections rendered ineffective, battalion command forced into withdrawal without achieving its objective. Most critically, the battalion never reached Elsenborn Ridge. That failure would ripple outward across the entire German offensive. While armored spearheads farther south pushed forward, the northern shoulder, anchored by the 99th Infantry Division and reinforced by the 2nd Infantry Division, held firm. German armor was denied access to critical road networks. Supply columns stalled. Fuel shortages intensified. The momentum Hitler desperately needed was gone. And at the heart of that failure stood a single delaying action, a lone American infantryman who refused to give ground. William Harrington regained consciousness 2 days later in a field hospital near Liège. Doctors were blunt. Another night in the forest and he would have died. His injuries were severe. Advanced hypothermia, frostbite in both feet and fingers, shrapnel wounds to shoulder and thigh, extreme dehydration and exhaustion. But he was alive. As officers from the 394th Infantry Regiment and V Corps reconstructed the battle, Harrington's story emerged piece by piece. Patrol reports, artillery timelines, captured German documents, survivor testimony. What they revealed stunned even seasoned veterans. For 72 continuous hours, Harrington had engaged elements of an entire German battalion, forced repeated halts and redeployments, created the illusion of a reinforced American defensive position, drawn off German companies into fruitless search operations, bought irreplaceable time for American reinforcements to arrive. General Walter E. Lauer, commander of the 99th Infantry Division, later noted that without the delay in Harrington's sector, German forces might have reached Elsenborn Ridge before defensive lines were fully established. Had that happened, the northern flank of the bulge could have collapsed. It did not, because one man held. Harrington was formally awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the Purple Heart, a battlefield promotion to corporal. The citation read, in part, "Through extraordinary heroism, indomitable courage, and complete disregard for personal safety, this soldier delayed a vastly superior enemy force, directly contributing to the successful defense of Elsenborn Ridge and the failure of the enemy offensive in that sector." Yet Harrington himself never considered it heroism. In later interviews, he spoke rarely of the fighting. He spoke instead of the cold, of the silence, of the fear of falling asleep, of the faces of the men he never saw again. Today, military historians studying the Battle of the Bulge consistently highlight the defense of Elsenborn Ridge as one of the decisive failures of the German offensive. While armored breakthroughs occurred elsewhere, the northern shoulder never broke, and within that defense lies a truth often lost in sweeping maps and grand strategy. Wars are not only decided by armies. Sometimes, they are decided by one exhausted soldier, frozen in the snow, refusing to step aside, against impossible odds, against an entire battalion. For 72 relentless hours. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to www.records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.